I, 24, female, got married to David, 25, male, not his real name, a year ago after being in a relationship for 2 years. We met through my cousin who went to college with him and became good friends with David. He and I come from very, very different families, and I still don't know how we managed to stay together for so long when we were so different ourselves. For context, my parents are both realtors, and I've had a normal childhood. I also have a sister who's 3 years younger than me, so I wasn't spoiled either. We weren't too rich, but we weren't exactly poor, somewhere in the middle. It wasn't the same for David, who was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He was the only child of his father, Sean, 50, male, and since Sean was a business tycoon, David was a totally spoiled brat. His mother, Naomi, 48, female, was a socialite and didn't do much apart from attending parties and going on shopping sprees, mostly because she didn't need to do anything else. They were literally straight out of a novel and not in a good way. My in-laws were rich and arrogant in the worst possible way, and they didn't even try to make me feel comfortable when I first met them. In hindsight, it feels weird that I didn't think their behavior was odd, but I was so in love with David that I didn't even care how his parents were. Neither did I care about the fact that they demanded that I live with them once we got married. I just agreed to all their terms and conditions because I wanted to marry David, and I assumed that so did he. He was my first serious boyfriend, and before him, I'd only ever had short flings with either men who weren't serious about me or men whom I didn't care much for. David was sweet, charming, and seemed like the perfect guy while we were dating, so I didn't think there was anything wrong with moving in with my in-laws once we got married. To be fair, they lived in a literal mansion, and I believed that we'd have our personal space in spite of the living arrangement. His parents had also been quite civil to me before we got hitched, and that was yet another reason for me not to question things. After I said yes to his proposal and agreed to their arrangement, it was my in-laws who seemed thrilled and covered the cost of the entire wedding, even though my parents had said that they wouldn't mind splitting the cost. My family and I actually thought that they really liked me, and we even discussed at length how they were being so kind to me. We had no idea what was to come, especially with regards to David, who had never been anything but perfect in my head. David and I ended the lease on our rented apartment a week before our wedding and moved in with his parents soon after the wedding. The first few days were nice enough, but gradually things began to change for the worse, and it was so slow in the initial days that I barely even noticed it. Both Sean and Naomi had started becoming a lot colder towards me and weren't as civil in their way of speaking as they used to be earlier. They'd ignore my existence if it suited them, and then if they were feeling mean, they'd make snide comments about me and my family. David told me not to mind it initially and said that once we'd had a baby, it would cement my place in the family and my in-laws would turn over a new leaf. But I wasn't ready to have kids and wanted to wait it out. That led to a few arguments and fights between us, after which he started growing distant from me and wouldn't spend as much time with me as he would earlier. This was just the first 3 months of our marriage, and they'd already started showing their true colors, but I still stupidly kept hoping that things would get better eventually. After a couple of months passed, the pressure to have a baby began to build from all sides, and I began to seriously consider moving back home. But every time I'd say that to David, he'd tell me that he loved me and couldn't bear to live without me. It became a vicious cycle, and I was just so exhausted that I even fell behind at work. I'd already said no to taking the lead on a few big projects that had been offered to me, and let others manage those because I wasn't sure if I'd be able to handle the pressure from my in-laws and at work altogether. I was in a very dark place at the time and didn't even have the energy to fight for myself when it came to David and his parents and their constant nagging and jibes. I kind of gave up and took it all without complaint because I didn't feel brave enough to say a word. And looking back, It sucks that I let things get so bad in the first place at all. I could have left him, but I loved him, and every time I'd wanted to leave, he'd play the "I love you and can't live without you" card, which just made it impossible for me to leave. I was already feeling weak, and that just made me feel worse about even thinking of leaving when my husband insisted that he loved me so much. I was trapped, so to speak. This went on for a while, and would have probably gone on for longer had I not discovered David's affair. About 3 weeks ago, I was reading in bed and David had gone on a jog. He'd left his phone on the bed, but after a while I heard buzzing from another source, which seemed weird. I checked the phone that was on his bed and that wasn't buzzing, so I looked all over the room and located another phone in his laptop bag. I'd never seen that phone before, and neither did I know anyone by the name of Jessica, and it took me a few seconds to try and process what I was witnessing. I kept the phone with me and tried to unlock it with no luck, so I decided to wait for David to come back home. When he came back home, we talked for a while, and then he went to sleep. After he fell asleep, I used his face to unlock the phone and went through the only messages he had on this phone, the ones with Jessica. Their texts were all pretty explicit, and it was obvious that he was having an affair with this lady. They'd made several plans to meet and had gone through with those plans as well, from the looks of it. The texts went back to almost 4 months, after we'd just been together a little over half a year. The recent texts weren't very flirty or cute, though, and were mostly Jessica demanding an explanation for something that had happened and insisting that he either leave me or he get the job done that he'd promised. David had been ignoring her for the most part, and that's probably why she'd called that day. While reading the text, I recorded it all with my phone and even took screenshots and sent them to my email address for good measure. Then I cried myself to sleep as silently as I could, because the realization that David had been cheating on me for the past 4 months had finally hit me, and I couldn't hold it together anymore. I cried the entire night away, but by the next morning I was ready to confront David about what I'd found. I expected him to deny it or try to get me to forgive him, but he did none of those things, to my surprise. He owned it and told me very confidently that he had cheated on me with an employee, and everyone in the family knew about it as well. Apparently, he'd meant to tell me about it, but he thought that it would get in the way of having a child, and he didn't want that right now because his parents were hounding him to have a baby so they'd have an heir for the company at the earliest. That was pretty much my only purpose as a member of their family, to present them with a kid so they'd have someone to take over the business eventually, and that's why he'd married me so early. According to him and my in-laws, these were my prime years and I'd have to have a baby soon. It was already bad enough that I came from such a financially weak background. The least I could do for them was give them a healthy child at the right time. He even had the audacity to tell me that he was getting stressed out because of my refusal to have a baby and the pressure that his parents had put him under, which is why he'd had an affair. And he'd been honest with his family about it, so there was no need for me to get so mad since his parents didn't mind. Jessica was just his stress relief, but at the end of the day, I was the one he loved and I was his wife, so I didn't have to worry. After saying all that rubbish to me, he left for work that day without even waiting for a reply because he thought this was totally normal behavior. I packed my stuff up right after he left and snuck out of the house to go back to my parents' place, where I told them everything once I got there. They had no idea how my life was at my in-laws' place because I'd never told them out of fear that there'd be a ton of drama if I did tell them the truth about how I was being treated by my husband and in-laws. After I found out about the affair, I realized there was no point in holding back anymore, and I spilled everything. My parents were very supportive and instantly put me in touch with one of their friends who happened to have a son, a divorce attorney. I told David that I needed some time to think and that I'd be living with my parents for a while, and he bought it. In the meantime, I worked out the divorce papers with my lawyer, and within 3 days, he'd been served. He didn't see it coming because I hadn't mentioned anything about divorce even after I'd learned about the affair, so he was definitely taken aback the day he was served and came right over to my parents' house. He thought that he could argue his way back into my life, but in my head our relationship was over and I'd accepted that, so his arguments were all pointless. He went back home disappointed that I wasn't staying with him despite his cheating, which just goes to show that he really did think of me as nothing but a huge pushover who could be bossed around all the time, and I'd stay nevertheless. The day after that, I received a call from my in-laws, and Naomi told me that I'd pay for what I'd done to her son because he'd apparently been miserable once he realized I wasn't coming back. She told me that I'd made her son cry, and that's why they'd make sure that I was absolutely destroyed in court. I told them I could handle it and then blocked them, but that was just all talk. I knew they were rich and influential people, so picking a fight with them wasn't exactly in my best interests. After contemplating for a couple of days, I decided to take a leap of faith and get in touch with Jessica. I remembered that they hadn't been on good terms in the recent past, judging by their texts, and I hoped that she'd be willing to help me out. After a lot of stalking, I found out that Jessica was actually an employee where David worked. Sean was the founder and CEO of the company, and David was the COO of the same company. Jessica worked under David, which I found out from their website. Once I found her social media account, I decided to text her and ask her to meet me because I didn't think these things were appropriate to be discussed in the text. She agreed and we met at a nearby cafe about a week ago. She was a couple of years older than us, very attractive and single, so it was no big surprise that David had chosen her to have an affair with. She apologized to me for wrecking my home, but also said that it was not personal and the only reason she'd gotten involved with David was because she was the one who initiated the affair, and he had promised her a huge promotion and raise if she agreed. So for her, it was mostly greed and ambition that allowed her to forget that David was a married man and continue the affair with him. And for David, it was just a stress buster. She told me that she'd continued to work even after the affair ended about a month ago because the promotion that she'd been promised ended up going to some other employee who also happened to be a woman, which had led her to believe that she was probably not the only person that David was involved with in the office. She'd been trying to get back at David by texting him on his secret phone that he usually hid from me by keeping it turned off along with his laptop. But on the day that I'd found out, he'd probably forgotten to do so. Jessica confessed to me that she'd been trying to blackmail him into promoting her, or else she'd come out with the truth and end our marriage. So he could either leave me himself, or she'd arrange it for him. Unfortunately, the threats had no effect on him because somewhere deep down, both of them knew that he had way too much influence and wasn't going to be intimidated by an ordinary employee. She'd be the one jeopardizing her future career if she spoke up, and that's why she'd had to continue working in silence despite knowing what she did because she was scared she'd lose her job if she said anything against him. Me texting her had given her some hope, and that's why she'd agreed to meet me, so we could at least come up with some idea about what to do next. I explained my side of the story to her, and then we decided that for now, her best bet would be to file a report with the police to make sure this goes on his record, and get in touch with the other female employees of the office so we could find out if he was involved with any of them or not. After about 4 days, she told me that she'd spoken to most of the female employees that she worked with, and the majority of them said that they had been offered such deals by David where he'd hinted at promotions if they agreed to his terms. A lot of them had turned him down, but another woman, the one who had been promoted, told us that she'd had an affair with not only David, but also Sean. And when she'd heard that Jessica was about to receive the promotion over her, she dropped by at their house to confront them in person. I wasn't at home at the time and had been away with a few of my friends, so I hadn't witnessed this incident personally, but she told me that when she'd confronted the two men, Naomi had actually physically attacked her and slapped her senselessly. She'd pinned her down to the floor with Sean's help while David yelled at them to stop, but didn't actually do anything to stop them physically. They'd hurt her pretty badly, and she went home with scratches and bruises all over because of how vicious Naomi had been, while screaming at her like crazy and accusing her of being an immoral homewrecker. Once she got home, she called David and told him that she was going to complain to the cops, but he pacified her and told her that he'd make sure she got the promotion she deserved as long as she kept the affairs quiet. So, in exchange for that, she agreed, but even now Sean had continued to verbally abuse her and treat her like crap when no other employees were around. She'd stayed quiet for the same reason as Jessica, because she knew how powerful these people were and she didn't want to invite trouble to herself for no reason. In addition to that, she also didn't have any proof of the attack itself. So she couldn't come out and accuse Naomi because she knew they'd destroy her. When she said that, I finally remembered something I'd done ages ago, back when David and I had started fighting over when to have a baby. When nobody was at home, not even the housekeeper, I'd had CCTV cameras with recorders installed in every room of the house because I'm a generally paranoid person and things were so bad at the time that I'd started considering divorce but hadn't left. I'd installed the cameras so I'd have proof of the kind of mistreatment I was going through for the divorce to make it easier. But then I'd forgotten about it because things were so bad. When I was told that she didn't go to the police because she had no proof of the attack, I decided to finally log into the system and check out the footage from the date she'd mentioned, and luckily, the cameras had captured every single thing. It was horrifying to watch Naomi attack her while Sean helped her out and my husband just stood by, doing the bare minimum, but not actually bothering to physically intervene. I knew they were horrible people, but this was way too much for even me to stomach, and even talking about this right now makes me feel so uncomfortable. Once I found the footage, I forwarded it to the two women and told them to go report everything to the cops, which they did. And a few days ago, my husband and in-laws were all arrested for the things they'd done, and I couldn't have been happier about it. It was David's lawyer who called me and told me about it because apparently David had said that he wanted to speak to me. They were all being detained in prison until the trial started, but I had no intention of going to visit him. When I told his lawyer that I wasn't interested in seeing him again, the man literally lashed out at me and called me all sorts of degrading names. It wasn't surprising because David and his lawyer were actually childhood friends, but for him to take things so personally was a little surprising for me. He accused me of using and manipulating David's co-workers so that it would be easier for me to get what I wanted in the divorce settlement, which made me just as bad as him, if not more, since even I was using people for my own gain. I didn't know what to say to him, so I just hung up without arguing, but now that I think of it, it kind of does make sense. After all, I did push Jessica and the other woman and God knows how many other employees into something that would definitely affect their future and their careers, all because I didn't want my divorce to go awry. And I was too scared to go up against my in-laws all by myself. I keep trying to convince myself that everything will work out fine for everyone involved, but I don't know that for sure. And so if things don't go well for Jessica and the others, that'll be my fault, and I'll never be able to forgive myself for it. On the other hand, I also don't think it's a bad thing that they're in jail right now because they're all pretty messed up people and don't deserve to roam around freely because there's no telling whose life they might ruin next. I could talk about this to my friends and family, but they'd side with me, and that's why I've turned to Reddit for an honest and unbiased verdict. AITA for pushing my husband's employees to report him so that I have more leverage over him to work with for our upcoming divorce settlement. Update 1. I didn't expect this post to blow up the way it did, and the support has been overwhelming, so I've had to take my time to process things. I'm also going through a divorce right now, so things have been pretty messy. I have, however, been going through the comments and the messages that you guys have sent, and I'm really thankful for your kind words. It makes it a lot easier for me to deal with my current life right now. I don't know how long this process is going to take, because right now we're still in the early stages of negotiations for the settlement and alimony. But I'm hopeful that things will get easier and better slowly but surely. There's also the ongoing trial regarding David, where quite a few ex-employees have also come out and spoken up against him. It's pretty scary that these things happened, and I had no clue about it at all. My cousin who introduced me to him heard about this in the local news and reached out to me to apologize for even introducing me to such a horrible man and an even worse family. Jessica had been keeping me updated on the trial, and it's not looking too good for them at the moment. They might be looking at anywhere from 3 years to even 5 or more. It's crazy how David, in spite of the situation he's in, has still managed to get on my last nerve during the negotiations. They're conducted online because I refused to go out there to see him in person. He doesn't deserve that. And he always makes it a point to tell me that he loved me and I ruined his life. Like, no, you ruined your own life by cheating on your wife and being a creep. That's not my fault. It's tough right now, but I'm trying to go with the flow. Update 2. It's final. The judge ruled that David and his parents were going to jail for 3 years. He was able to wiggle out of a more strict punishment because at least the relationships were consensual, even though it was still basically exploitation of his employees. He's also going to have to pay a huge sum to all the women who spoke up and testified against him, and that's definitely going to affect his bank balance significantly. I don't know how that's going to affect my settlement and alimony, but I guess I'll find out soon enough. For now, I'm happy that he's going to face the punishment for whatever he put these women through. He totally deserves this and much worse, if I'm being honest. Update 3. Hi everyone. So I'm back after a long time, and I guess people have been wondering what happened to me. Things have been better ever since my divorce was finalized about 6 weeks ago. David and his parents had to sell off all their assets to be able to pay off and compensate their victims. I also received the amount I'd asked for in the settlement, and the alimony is going to be paid in installments over the next couple of years. I'm not sure if he'll be able to pay off the entire amount, though, judging by the state of their company. Their stocks had been plummeting steadily ever since the news of their arrest broke, and they haven't managed to recover since, even though their board of directors have put other people in charge to replace David and Sean. It's quite possible that they might go bankrupt and shut down, which would be sad for the other employees, but they can always find other jobs where they don't have to work for creeps like these. I hope their company gets shut down and they go bankrupt, to be honest. Yeah, I won't get my alimony, but it'll be totally worth it still. For now, I'm just focusing on rebuilding my own career and life. I'm going to therapy, to the gym, and just trying to live my life the way I'd wanted to before David came along and ruined it all. Stay tuned for more stories from Argo Relationships.